philosophers always love Star Trek examples, although many of us also loathe them at the same time. The example of the transporter is like, there's just no problem is ever raised about personal identity.
My name is Ben Charland, and you're listening to What on Earth is Going On? My conversation this week is with philosopher Amy Schmitter, professor at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. We have a fascinating, if wide-ranging, conversation about philosophy, and at many times it'll be obvious that I am definitely the amateur and she is definitely the professional. But that being said, I think we do grapple with some really interesting issues that not only confront philosophy and its history, which is what Amy focuses on, but the modern times and how to think about the modern world and how to answer this question, what on earth is going on? The utility of thinking, the development of the nation state, small talk versus big talk. How would Descartes see the world today? Artificial intelligence, consciousness, and of course, democracy. It's a really interesting conversation, and I hope you take the time not just to listen to it, but to let me know what you think. You can send your feedback at any time by visiting the website whatonearthisgoingon.ca, finding me by email or on social media, and not only letting me know what you think of this episode, but any other. All right, Amy Schmitter, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. It really is an honor to be here. I appreciate your asking me very much.
Well, it's an honor to have you. I'm really excited to chat with you about a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. We're here at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Alberta, where you're a professor. I relish in the opportunity to chat with philosophers. I don't get many opportunities to. It seems that when I email philosophers to do these conversations, the response is always fearful and, well, what are we going to talk about and how specific? And there seems to be a fear with conversation, which is so anathema to what I think philosophy is about. Philosophy, for me, from an amateur's perspective, is about having a conversation about the meaning of life and answering this question, what on earth is going on? And so I really appreciate, not that I think it should be that brave, but thank you for being brave enough to have a conversation with me about philosophy.
Well, I'm delighted that somebody wants to hear about it. I think the fearful response you're saying is because usually people don't want to hear about it.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it probably depends on the person, doesn't it? I think that sometimes it's not what they expect, and so they would be fine with sort of throwing off kind of thoughts every now and then. But philosophers tend to sort of stop and question what you've just said and want to dig deeper. And I think a lot of people find that uncomfortable. And they're not usually particularly comfortable with sort of being asked the reasons or perhaps even justification for what they've said. Even if that's not, I think, meant as it usually isn't with philosophers, meant in a hostile sense so much as just that's kind
of what we do. An inquisitive sense,
Yeah, sort of digging a little bit deeper.
I think that's a wonderful quality, and one of the taglines I have for this podcast is it's a show where we don't have small talk, but we do have curiosity.
Yeah.
And if there is anything that I say that you want to dig into, please go ahead and say, Ben, hold on a second. What you said was really stupid. No, I'm just joking.
No, I'm not. That would definitely be a pedagogically inappropriate response. But actually, I wanted to put in a word for small talk.
Okay.
I mean, I think small talk can actually be quite fun. It can be done badly or well, as is true of most things. But one of the philosophers in the history of philosophy who I work on, David Hume, who some people may know if you've ever visit Edinburgh, there is a very inappropriate statue of him wearing a toga, which is not something he ever wore in life. But he's very interested in, so to speak, the social relations and how they're established. And I don't think he uses the term small talk, but the idea of polite conversation of various kinds is important to him. And I think he thinks of it as forming a certain kind of social bond that's important for all sorts of dimensions of life. And I don't know. Like I said, I think small talk can be done well, and then it's kind of delightful.
I love this because right now we're having big talk about small talk.
Well, maybe that's what I think of as small talk, though.
Right. I guess when I talk
I did
about,
manage to get Hume in there, so I
that was right on.
Yeah.
Now we got Hume. We got a few others. We got to find a way to name drop. I'm sure we won't have a problem. But when it comes to small talk, I guess what I'm getting at when I say that is I want to have an hour where there is a pressure to dig in, as opposed to just let the time go by. I think a lot of our time is spent, especially in the social media era, to simply pass the time or to get the next fix of dopamine or whatever chemical my brain is looking for.
In some
or
ways,
kill time, And I don't want to kill this time. I want to really use this time, and every minute is valuable. And that's not a pressure. That's not a burden. To me, and I think to the people that I talk to, that's an opportunity to dig in and to enjoy this conversation and to not know where it's going to go. And I think small talk on the negative sense of it, not maybe what Hume is talking about, but small talk is in I'm just avoiding people by interacting with them. I'm avoiding what's underneath. I'm not going to be curious.
Putting a wall up with sort of volleying things across this wall.
Right. Yeah. Small talk in that sense is where if you did say to me, well, wait a minute, what did you mean by what you just said? That would be inappropriate. That would be, you're piercing that wall that I put up. Whereas I'm saying, let's take the walls down and be okay with that kind of questioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. I think there are different kinds of, so to speak, small talk. And I certainly would never want to stop anybody from sort of having the opportunity to say, wait a second, what are you saying? And, could you clarify that? Could you say it in another way? And particularly also, why are you saying it?
Right, which is such a good question.
Yeah. It's many questions, right? Why are you saying it? Or why would one say that? And they're all, I think, perhaps good questions, but it depends on what you're getting after.
I've got a question for you before we get to the what on earth is going on question, which we will get to. You seem you really like this stuff. You like philosophy. You like talking about this. It's written on you. I can see it. Why? Why is it so interesting?
Well, I can say something for me and for I think a number of my friends. It floated our boats early on when we started doing it. And then we found other people who you could sort of sit around and actually develop that kind of social bond by talking about philosophy or talking in a philosophical way. And it's fun. There is in the history of philosophy, I was going to say Western philosophy, but there may be some other areas of philosophy where this is true as well. There's a deeply dialogic structure. One of the things people might read if they took a introduction to philosophy class right away would be a Platonic Dialogue, in which you have Socrates wandering around asking people questions and then usually annoying them enormously. Remember in one of my first classes, the instructor said, well, you kind of know why they gave him the hemlock, don't you? But genuinely sort of looking for kind of conversations, and different dialogues are different kind of structures to that. Sometimes people stick around, sometimes they run away. But that thought of sort of engaging with somebody at that kind of level is, I think, deeply in the DNA of philosophy, and it is just one of the things that we enjoy.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
I think that's a key term that we often forget, or maybe because philosophy, like poetry, to an outsider, can seem dry and difficult and the opposite of fun. But really, it's baked into on a greater level, it seems to me, baked into what philosophy is from a Hegelian perspective of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, that it's a conversation that is building our knowledge.
Yeah. By the way, that thesis antithesis thing, that's actually not Hegel.
Oh, really?
It was meant to explicate Hegel. It was okay. And I'm not expert enough in the slightly post-Hegelian philosophy to say much more than that.
So he didn't say that.
He did not say that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a kind of structure imposed, which is what we do. I am largely a historian of philosophy. And, this is the kind of thing we do is we try to dig out sort of the conceptual schema and their implications for various philosophers. And that it's interesting that one has so stuck as if Hegel himself said it.
Yeah, when someone mentions Hegel to me, which doesn't, I guess, happen all that often, but when they do, that's one of the first principles that comes up for me.
It's I can understand why. It's an easy sort of thing to remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a slogan. And so I mostly work in the history of early modern philosophy, which is 17th and 18th centuries. And there are a number of slogans that kind of people remember.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. Yeah. And also a supposed distinction between rationalists and empiricists, which most people I know who work in the area really dislike that.
Right.
And that actually, I think, is also another post-Hegelian interpretation that was that caught on. But they're easy. I mean, and I understand as a sort of mnemonic device why people would kind of catch hold of these things. But they often are misleading.
Yeah, I remember one of the books that I read. It was long after I was in school. I didn't study philosophy as a major, but I took philosophy courses.
Mm-hmm.
And long after I read Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. Yeah. And there's a lot of, by not to say that the guy was a simplifier, but he certainly had to write a book for the general public where he tried to explain how philosophy has evolved over time. Yeah. And there certainly was this idea of continental or rational philosophy versus the English and Scottish form of philosophy. Mm-hmm. And that was easy for me to understand because my worldview, of course, as a white Western male, comes from this idea of, there's this English heritage that has been inherited through Canada and the Constitution and the way we write our laws, even to the way we talk every day, which may be changing over time. But that's the way that I received my world in my schooling. And therefore, that's why his book made sense to me. So the mnemonic devices, yes, but they fit in the wider educational context.
Yeah, no, I think that makes good sense. And also, Russell is a beautiful writer. Mm-hmm. He writes very smoothly and cleanly, and he had some interest in the history of philosophy, but he was not what I would say kind of fine-grained historian of philosophy. Yeah. And for me, that's where a lot of the fun is in the fineness of the grain and making kind of fairly nitpicking, if you like, distinctions among things, but that often end up having kind of important consequences farther down the line. But yeah, no, the notion that we're the inheritor of a certain kind of tradition, I think that there's a great deal to that, and but we often are not particularly good even at picking up at what we've inherited or conceiving of it all that well, and sometimes these mnemonic devices, if that's the right way to, I'm not sure it's a mnemonic device exactly, but fairly simple kinds of boxes in which to put things, obscure things even about, so to speak, what we've inherited from a lot of this. It's
kind of, if we position this as story, it's how story seems to evolve. And sometimes story evolves through the mistakes that we don't recognize maybe at the time are mistakes, and then we have a new story. Yeah. In preparation for this, I studied a little bit about the philosophy of art, which is another of your fields. And this question of, what is a piece of art? And there's this thought experiment of, imagine you have, a golden cat sitting on a campus somewhere. And for 100 years, that golden cat is sitting on the campus, but people have kept trying to take it away, to steal that cat. So they put a chain around its neck. Now, the original art piece was just the cat. But if that chain is there for decades or even centuries, that becomes a piece of the art. But then that forces us to ask the question, what is the piece of art? Likewise, with philosophy, what is this principle if it's been, you could say, polluted or corrupted or just added to over time? It seems to me that this is close to what the human experience is, this additive, cumulative experience over time.
Oh, I think very, very much so, actually. That's... in a much smaller scale way, a little bit the way, the evolution of species works, right? Where, something sort of fits at a certain time, and you develop various, functional traits that fit that, and then circumstances change, and something that was perhaps just a byproduct of things becomes incredibly functional and important. And so it's a very messy kind of history.
Messy, I think, is a really good word. Like, when we talk about species, is it speciesization or specialization?
Speciation, yeah.
Speciation, sorry. There is no fine single moment when that happens.
No.
Right?
No.
I mean, the fact of a wolf and a dog being of different species, well, yes, they are now, but there was no moment when that happened. And it's not, and like a dog and a wolf can still, in some circumstances, breed, which is sometimes the moment that a species is created when it can no longer breed with the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also when environments change, or if there are marginal environments or something like that. Famous article by Stephen Jay Gould called The Pandas Thumb, which is about the panda, which is in some ways not terribly well suited to any environment. It had this kind of knuckle bone, I guess, that then was sort of pressed into service, if you like, kind of gerrymandered it to sort of help it strip bamboo. And it works okay. It's not great. But it was not, there's no sense in which it was evolved for this.
Right.
It was sort of the, so to speak, practice of holding and stripping bamboo so it can eat. The panda was developed kind of later, and you just took the materials that were there. And I do think this is actually the way a great deal of thought, and philosophy does involve thought, evolves as well. So, as I said before, I do the history of early modern philosophy, and one of the kind of key central features of that is the development of well, I was going to say the new science. It's no longer so new, but what became eventually Newtonian mechanics. And there's a series of kind of fits and starts, and the mistakes are as important as other things.
Well, that's a feature of science as opposed to a bug.
Yeah.
That science evolves by, and our scientific understanding and knowledge evolves by things that we got wrong, or hypotheses that were not right, but that lead to something even more exciting or more interesting.
Yeah.
The idea of space travel since the 1950s and 60s, a lot of people ask, well, what's been the point of going into space or going to the moon? I mean, you did some experiments up there, but they weren't that productive. No, but all the technology that was developed in order to go to do these things have provided an immense amount of good and utility to our society and around the world. But there's also experiments that just force us to think in a new way. And I think this idea you just raised of thinking and the practice of thinking, I think we're better off when we expand that, hopefully sometimes a little bit. Yeah.
Well, there are always, I think, unintended consequences, which is not, by the way, an excuse for, not actually trying to plan something or discover something. But it does mean that there are things that can kind of drop out that you cannot see at the time, and you don't know what actually the effect will be until later, which is, again, for a historian of philosophy, one of the things that makes history so interesting. But there are also, I mean, kind of silly examples, if you like, of mistakes. So I have been working on it for a while, but at one point I worked a little bit on the mathematical practices of Descartes, René Descartes. And there's a sense that some of what motivated him to discover, as it were, new and what seemed like very unrigorous at the time mathematical practices was because there is a tradition inherited from Aristotle about how mathematics should work that might have resulted in, might have stemmed from misreading Aristotle on something.
Wow.
I mean, just a blatant kind of misreading. Actually, I think in the Italian kind of Renaissance, basically, in the 1500s or so, the so-called question of the certainty of mathematics, which was kind of driven by what might have been a misreading of Aristotle. And so people were very worried about how to understand the mathematics, which is largely kind of geometry, and how to understand it as a genuine science, a science in a very broad sense of the term, a genuine principled body of knowledge that would give you something like certainty.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's and it was a sign of both the prestige of Aristotle and also how few texts in some ways were left. And people weren't actually didn't have some of the equipment to read even some of the texts that were left properly. That as I said, might have been a mistake. That the mistake I'm thinking of is that Aristotle might have presented what he called a method of presentation, and people thought it was a method of discovery. Aristotle was so big that this was, this kind of crisis moment in intellectual thought. And as I said, it seems to come from this kind of mistake in just reading Aristotle.
Well, and just, talking about Aristotle and Plato, which we've mentioned as well, there's this, I read this book, and I can't remember the title of it, but it's essentially the history of philosophy as seen through the lens of the conflict between Plato and Aristotle through the thousands of years that have occurred since they were alive, and how we've kind of in Western philosophy gone back and forth, privileging one but then going back to the other, and this, as if they were two poles, as if they were the fundamental building blocks. And of course there's so much more to philosophy, especially now.
And they share an enormous amount.
Of course. I mean, they were
amount,
part of the same culture, in close to the same time period, in the same lineage of philosophy, and yet they seem to have taken these different branches of a tree, so to speak. And I remember that was a very interesting and illuminating perspective, if only because there were so many interpreters of them over time. And it was just astounding to me, more than anything, in reading this book, that there were philosophers who were essentially philosophers of Plato and of Aristotle through the centuries that were just fighting for their corner. And that's what kind of kept these original philosophers so big, as you say.
Yeah. Well, and they were also Aristotle, both, but Aristotle particularly were disseminated incredibly broadly through the world. So they're not just European. They're from the Middle East. Actually, there's, I believe, although I am not the right person to ask about this, that there was some dissemination of Aristotle, perhaps kind of word of mouth more than anything else, all the way to Japan.
Wow.
I do not know the details of that.
Right.
So it's outside of my comfort area, but so I mean, if you like, it's one of the things that binds a good chunks of philosophy together, is that you're responding to people who are sometimes responding to the same people.
Yeah.
And often not on the same page. But Aristotle is particularly, I think, there are many, many, many Aristotles.
Right.
Again, it's really not my area of specialization. But people who do study ancient Greek philosophy, I remember somebody saying, it's not enough now to know Latin and Greek and perhaps, classical Arabic. You now need to know the entire history of the commentators on Aristotle.
Yeah.
That's 1,500 years of people writing madly in all sorts of different languages in all sorts of different countries.
Yeah, this conversation that has been going on, this dialogue that has been going on over hundreds of years. It's and to me that's both fascinating but also masking maybe what this one guy was just trying to say. 2,500 years ago. And I still want to get to the question, though, Amy. So I'm going to give it to you now. You can take this anywhere you like. You can completely change the trajectory of our conversation. Okay. This is your chance. So, Amy, what on earth is going on?
Well, I am going to actually use this wonderful golden opportunity you've given me to talk about the areas of philosophy that I am currently most working on, which, as I said, it's the history of philosophy, but it's particularly the history of early modern philosophy, 17th and 18th centuries, in Western Europe, not solely in Western Europe, actually. And because it's kind of an exciting time for it. There have actually been a few new texts even discovered recently.
No kidding.
Or probably better to say versions of already known texts, but ones that might shed some light on them, although they have not been publicized sufficiently and digested. But just, I think, a few months ago, there was I think it's supposed to be an early version of John Locke's letter on toleration was discovered. Anyway, so there's things like that, but there's also just like a lot of interesting work that's going on. The early modern period is is a very interesting period because it coincides with sort of shakeups in Western Europe of science, of the structure, the development of the nation state is in this period, right? Economic structures, social structures,
Religion.
educational, ro- uh, absolutely religion, and educational institutions, all sorts of things are going on, and people respond by basically writing all sorts of new and wild philosophy, and it's in some ways rather fragmented. So everybody kind of does their I don't mean to say that they're isolated from one another, but it's rather than, so to speak, accepting certain kinds of common grounds or common concepts or common problems, people are kind of going off and doing all sorts of things, and perhaps but through the wonders of the World Wide Web and its many technological advantages, we now have lots more access to text. You can scan texts that are only in one library and make them available to everybody. So there's kind of a greater appreciation of all the people who are writing at the time and the sort of context in which a number of the more famous people would be writing and thinking and talking and writing letters to each other. There are a great number of women who write philosophy. Some published, some not published, some in the form of letters. The hold of kind of church-related and university-related educational institutions is greatly shaken up for a couple of centuries, and so it makes it a very interesting period of time to look at. And as you said, we are in some ways the inheritors of this period, and it also looks very unfamiliar, I think, too, which is what kind of excites me. I'd like to be able to think my way into somebody else's pattern of thinking.
Yeah, and I hope to ask you some questions about that. Like, I'd like to see, is it possible to ask what would, just purely from speculation, what would Descartes think about what's happening in the world now?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you could go with that. One of the things I find interesting, and it may even as we're talking right now change, is so Descartes is famous or notorious for his substance dualism, for the claim that mind and body are distinct things, substance being a technical term. And which I think is often actually, it's kind of misunderstood where the, so to speak, center of emphasis lies there. For Descartes, it was largely, probably as much to take many life functions, things that, so to speak, human bodies do, and to make them susceptible to explanation in the same way that you would explain machines. There are just some aspects of mind he thought you could not explain in that same way. They're kind of left over, if you like. I mean, not that's too dismissive, not merely left over. But in his discourse on method, he has it's just a very short little section about how if you were to be faced with an automaton that looked like a human being, how you could tell that it did not actually have a mind, or he uses the word reason there, but I think mind might be perfectly fine substitute here. And he gives two tests, and one of them is very much like what became known in the 20th century as the Turing test for artificial intelligence. It's what's sometimes called the generalized Turing test. So, you could invent an automaton that would look like a human being, that, when you pressed a button, he's thinking of pressing a button, but perhaps would respond to, hello, how are you, by saying, fine. Yeah, exactly. But what you couldn't get is engage it in a conversation where it would be able to respond meaningfully to whatever it is that you said. So it's the sensitivity to meaning is something that he doesn't think you can kind of capture by, so to speak, the principles of machine design. His doesn't have anything like an idea of computer software. It's mechanical
Sure.
principles. But she says that's the test, and it looks very much like the test that Alan Turing developed in the mid-20th century that he thought computers would be able to pass. And that date has come and gone.
Right.
And it's I mean, many people have criticized the Turing test that it actually wouldn't show what some people thought it would show, but it's an interesting kind of sort of prescient moment on Descartes' part, that there's something about language and the way we speak. And I said that sort of sensitivity to meaning and context and other people's meaningful statements, that still seems like a real test for what it is to be a kind of mind in the world.
But it's interesting because that doesn't mean it's impossible for us to create new minds through artificial intelligence. I mean, this is the debate that's happening now. You mentioned that there was this incredible churn, political, cultural, economic churn in the 17th century, for example, which led to people thinking about it and wondering and asking these questions that they hadn't had the chance to ask before. I wonder if you think that the same thing is happening today. For example, with artificial intelligence. I mean, this is something that, we've obviously Descartes had the idea of the automaton. In the 1980s, we had a movie called The Terminator. Right. But now we are actually seeing companies not only spend money, but reap the benefits of their research and development to develop and produce AI. Now, it may be what we call artificial narrow intelligence. It may be just a computer program that can play chess or play the game of Go really, really well. But in the same way, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, my kidney does one particular function very, very well, but it can't do anything my brain does. Yeah. My body is a constellation of different things that different organs and things brought together. Even the cell is a unit formed of different things doing different things. And so I wonder if, to go back to artificial intelligence, if we're also living in this time of philosophical churn, if people are asking questions like they did in the 17th century, or if we're kind of numb to this through consumerism and through social media. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, look, in the 17th century, the bulk of people were not asking these questions. The bulk of people were trying to, get by and not starve to death. That took a lot of work.
But like today, the bulk of people are not asking, I would say, what on earth is going on.
I mean, hope every now and then they wonder a little bit about some of these things. I don't know. I mean, the political situation in the last few years have been so completely crazy, and sort of unexpected, shocking even. It's hard to know what's going on, but the equivalent, I think, for now would be as if you really saw nation states breaking up. But I'm not sure even Brexit quite covers what happened, for instance, in the Europe of the 17th century. The kinds of religious wars, for instance, that were going on, but also just the formation of new socioeconomic and political institutions was, this happened over multiple generations. So I'm not sure that if you were in the middle of it, you could ever really tell.
Yeah. Like for example, the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, seen as that moment of the birth of the nation state for many historians. Yeah. Did people know at the time how important that document was that they were signing?
I don't know. That would be a good question for a historian of politics, which I'm not. But I am thinking, particularly in the British tradition, this is around the period of time when you're getting all these sorts of social contract and other kinds of accounts. Trying to find basically secular bases for the state and for state power, not seeing it as so to speak divinely ordained. I mean, when I think of, say, Thomas Hobbes, the infamous Thomas Hobbes, one of the ways to understand what he's doing is to really find a completely secular basis for a fairly powerful, centralized state apparatus. And it's one of the things that made him seem so scandalous at the time was that he was considered an atheist Not only for this reason, but for many other reasons. And anyway, that's that aspect of political philosophy, I think, is something that it's easy to tie to a number of different political and historical events going on right there. But do people really know how drastically things are going to change? Well, getting back to Descartes, he certainly wanted to. He wanted to shake things up. He wanted to, so to speak, get rid of what he took to be the often pernicious influence of Aristotle and replace it with his own thinking. Which in some ways he sort of did, but it didn't really take the shape that he thought it would. For instance, the work, the so-called Principles of Philosophy, is a very large work that he wrote, was meant to be kind of a textbook to be used in schools and replace the sort of available textbooks. Got used that way a little bit, but things changed much more than he thought they were going to.
Yeah.
He had serious ambitions. He didn't quite have the influence that he thought he was going to, but he had, I think, a different kind of influence.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about seems to me to speak to the function, if there is one, of philosophy, besides just, besides having fun, right?
Yeah.
Besides having fun and just
which
thinking
should not
about
be overlooked.
Which I don't think, well, that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. I want to have fun talking about this stuff. But I think if we interrogate it, we discover that there's a sort of a function to going back to these political philosophers that you mentioned, trying to find a secular basis for the state.
Yeah.
Well, they succeeded because now we all think this way. There is almost nobody I can imagine who thinks of a prime minister or president being divinely ordained to do their job and being part of a divine chain that leads down it all the way to you tilling a field.
Well, of course, the coronations, you still do have this religious ceremony for the coronation, but that's just kind of a relic, right?
Right,
it's like a cute little thing, right, to do.
But the monarchy itself has become a relic too, and I think that it's interesting because now when you talk to most people, their understanding of what a state is not based in religion. It's based in these philosophical ideas, even if they don't know the lineage of them, right? Even if, as you were saying earlier, even if it's based on a complete misunderstanding of where this stuff comes from, Hobbes and Locke and Hume and Hegel inform the way I live my daily life, whether I know it or not. Yeah.
Well, and I again, going back to Descartes, one of what I not just Descartes, actually, but 17th century sort of more generally, one of the real shifts, and it was, as I said, it wasn't simply accidental or nobody knew what they were doing, was a kind of shift in, so to speak, forms of explanation. So Aristotle developed at least four, there are other places he has, of what he calls causes. Causes, really. But there are just ways in which you can explain particularly natural things.
Okay.
You can explain them formally, by what kind of form they have. You can explain them materially in terms of what they're, as it were, composed out of, which doesn't actually always have to be matter. You can explain them in terms of their efficient cause, which is what either made them or makes the thing or keeps it kind of going, sustains it, maintains it. And also in terms of final cause, which is what the purpose of it is.
Right.
Teleological cause, it's sometimes called as well. And in Descartes, Hobbes, Spinoza, a whole host of other people, Leibniz not quite so much, but actually took really square aim at the notion that things have purposes. Natural things have purposes, and it's they were either trying to eliminate or greatly reduce explanation in terms of what the purpose of something was. It is a very natural way of explaining things, right?
Yeah,
because you're used to dealing with people
who have purpose.
And people have purposes, or, they sort of do. I mean, they're not always aware of what it is, but, and it's natural to kind of think of sort of the natural world as sort of
purposeful, like all life has the purpose to reproduce itself. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And it may be that it's not a very grand purpose. The tree just kind of wants to keep growing and produce new little trees. But it's a deeply embedded kind of way of thinking, and it was really attacked in the 17th century in its attempt to sort of limit it, and it opened up, I'd say, kind of new and very different forms of explanation, and it, we've got that now. It on the one hand, I'm really just thinking of the way people sort of talk carelessly. My computer hates me. It's trying to stymie me. And then that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Because, of course, your computer doesn't have purposes in the same way. That's a kind of, I think, effect, right, of this move in the 17th century to, not thinking of the world, that the non-human part of the world as sort of structured by things that are sort of purposeful and behave kind of the way we do, but without perhaps consciousness or intelligence or fully blown out reason. And, that is the 17th century. That I think lets people sort of think that way.
Did that partly happen because of the rise of scientific thinking to render the world more materialistic, not materialistic in the sense of consumption, but materialistic in the sense of the world is composed of atoms and material, and there's no necessarily any purpose to it. It's just this is stuff, and we are the animating consciousness. But perhaps that's just a byproduct of the stuff. Yeah.
And now, not just now, even in the 17th century, we sometimes started to, so to speak, reduce human behavior that seems purposeful to actually something rather different in kind.
Yeah.
Hobbes tried to do that. Spinoza tried to do that as well. Not so much Descartes. But yeah, it wasn't just a result of kind of the rise of modern science, ultimately Newtonian science. It's one of the things that makes it possible. There was science, physics before that. Aristotle has an entire work called The Physics, which is actually where one of the places he develops these accounts of causes and the various ways of forms of explanation. It was the thought that somehow nature doesn't work that way. That was really, I think, not the only move, but a crucial one.
One theme that has become apparent to me in this conversation so far is that philosophy is about dialogue. It's about conversation. Now, there are many forms of conversation, and I am not suggesting in the slightest that this conversation in particular adds to our philosophical understanding of the world, but I am suggesting that this is the form of thinking that we need to take to address the question, what on earth is going on? And I think it's quite apparent in this particular discussion. Now, coming up on this episode, we get heavy into consciousness and the big question of the mind. What is it? Where is it? How do we define it? That's all coming up on this episode of What on Earth is Going On. We're skirting on the edge of an issue here, or a subject that I want to tackle, and I'm going to do something that no one should probably ever do. I'm going to ask a philosopher, what is consciousness? And the reason I'm going to ask this is because, we can get into the deep, that's one of the key questions of philosophy, is it not? What is this feeling that I have that I am conscious? Yeah. Certainly Descartes tackled this issue and probably tackled it most famously with, I think, therefore I am. But what's your sense of it? Just knowing what you know, Amy, how would you, what is this? What is consciousness? What's your best stab at it?
Oh, I think it's one of those things, if look deep into your own mind and you should be able to see it.
Yeah.
By the way, this is where I'm going to be one of those nitpicking historians. Consciousness is a word of relatively recent origin. And it's not so clear that Descartes had that notion. He talks about perception. And I actually do think it's probably fair to use notions of consciousness to apply to them, at least in some respects. But, it kind of develops a bit later. Locke, in talking about, for instance, personal identity, develops the notion of sort of consciousness, kind of stream of consciousness things. But there are, to my mind, actually, a lot of early modern philosophers are just as much interested in the notion of attention. That is attention, of focusing in on something, and the kind of heightened awareness, if you like. But consciousness. I mean, there's philosophers of mind now, will sort of divvy up into camps about how they approach this. Is it something that you can only know from the first person perspective, for instance? Is it one way people have of talking about it, and I like this, is if there's something it's like to be you, that's consciousness, right?
Right.
Does it? But there's a question about, does it have a qualitative character? For instance, is there a certain kind of feel attached to consciousness? What I think with somebody like Descartes, the notion of perception captures this. That one feature of consciousness is it's always of things. It's directed.
Like I'm conscious of something.
You're
I'm
conscious
paying
of
attention to something.
right? And you may try to do a reflexive move and become conscious of your own consciousness. Try it right now.
To be conscious of my own consciousness.
Well,
I don't know what that. Yeah,
it's kind of a shift of attention, I think. Probably this is why I like the notion of attention as important here. But typically, what you're conscious of is the world around you, representing or picturing, or at least to have a kind of perception of it from a certain sort of angle. And that's maybe a way of getting at that kind of first-person perspective.
right. And I wonder, like, when you asked me that, can you be conscious of your own consciousness? I mean, I can in principle, in concept. I guess I can imagine being aware of that, but I feel like I can't see the bubble I'm in while I'm in the bubble. Right. And astronauts have always said that there is something special about seeing the planet Earth in one glance. And those who went to the moon and were able to see this planet changed their whole perspective on what it means to be human, what it means to inhabit this Earth. Likewise, if I could step out of my consciousness and see myself being conscious, I suppose, maybe I'd have a more rigorous or objective definition of it. But being in it, I'm in the river. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, in some ways, that just wouldn't even be consciousness anymore, right?
Sure.
Because part of the point is it is a angle, a perspective, a take, if you like, on things from a first person perspective.
And then from a material perspective, we then have to ask, like, what is it? Like, is it? Of course, Descartes said, I think therefore it's hard to refute that. I think therefore I am. However, I do have to ask, well, is it real in the sense that this table is real? Is it real in the sense that my emotions might be real? Like a squirrel is conscious, surely. They may not be able to be aware that they're conscious, but there's a certain sentience going on. And I just wonder, especially based on recent scientific studies which have shown that my reaction to the world is there's a delay between my picking up this pen and my decision to pick up the pen. That I'm rationalizing the picking up the pen, that I decided to do it after the fact of picking it up. That and neurologists have shown that there's a delay there. So then, am I only the after image of everything that I'm doing? Yeah.
Well, I mean, everything you said, that's fine. I actually don't see what that has to do with your questioning about whether your consciousness, your mind, your awareness, whatever you want to call it, is actually there.
No, I guess I'm not saying, I'm not wondering if it's actually there or not. I'm just trying, maybe it's more of a question of what is it? Or is it the same thing as this table is here?
Presumably not, since you're touching the table right now. And and you can, knock on it and so forth. The things you're pointing to about, like, the delay and perhaps even the rationalizing what you were doing after certain kinds of bodily events, nerve impulses and blood flow and what have you, go on. That's just a suggestion that you're interacting with both your body and the world that your body is in contact with, and that is, I think, and it's an important feature, but it leaves all sorts of things open. About how you want to identify yourself, and what you are, and it does seem to me that the first person experience we have, and I don't just mean first person singular, but first person plural as well, the we that we can have, that, it's like, that's, that's there, to deny that would be to deny something in some ways that's perfectly obvious.
Yeah, self-evident.
Self-evident, indeed. And now you can be wrong about what that is. You might think that some things are necessary to that consciousness, awareness, again, first person stance that you have. You might think some things are essential to it that aren't, or you might think some things that aren't central to it actually, they actually are. So I think you can be wrong about that. But the sense that you've got kind of some sort of access to it.
Yeah.
A perspectival access, for sure. Because it is kind of like having a perspective on things. Both because I think the kind of consciousness, if consciousness is the right word to use for what we're talking about, I'll say awareness. In some ways, it's right there in front of you. But like many things that are right there in front of you, it's actually quite tricky to explain it sometimes.
Yeah, as soon as you grab a hold of it, it kind of vanishes in your hands.
Yeah.
Is there
I'm not sure that it vanishes in your hands, but it just, you're like, and what further thing do I want to
I guess what I meant by that, it's like the whole idea of light being both a particle and a wave, right? So that if I think of consciousness as another brick in the structure of philosophy, if I go to grab that brick, it's no longer a brick. If I put it in my hand, it's now something I can't hold in my hand. It's yeah.
I think actually one of the reasons why it might seem sort of frustrating is because you kind of want to get, so to speak, a third person perspective. The way that we think of the kind of, if you like, picture of the way we think of examining something, sort of subjecting it to intellectual scrutiny, is just sort of stand back and look at it with a certain kind of third person distance. And if consciousness is intrinsically first personal, or perhaps actually accessible in the second person, you as well as I or we, then you're going to be frustrated if your model of trying to examine it has, so to speak, got that picture of the third person distance.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why people are tempted to say, well, maybe it's, it's not really real.
Well, but we know, I think I guess we've established in this conversation, if that's the thing we can say, that there's a realness to it. It's real. I think maybe the frustration for me or for some people is that can I be human and not have this thing I call consciousness? Or would humans exist, or any life exist without this thing we call consciousness? Because there are some who have argued that consciousness is sort of like the byproduct of if being human is like, okay, so what does it mean to be a snake, right? So a snake is really good at being quiet and being very, very quick. It's also good at essentially seeing the world through the sense of smell and vibrations. It's got all these different things it can do, and it has a brain to respond to the environment. Some people have said that what makes a human being excel in their environment is the ability to think through a situation. A snake doesn't think through, it reacts. A human being stuck in a tree because there's a leopard in the tree or below the tree or a bear or something has the capacity to think through this situation. We only need that capacity once every couple of weeks, maybe. The rest of the time, though, we're left over with this residue, always waiting to come into action to give us this power of thinking our way through. And I love that explanation, but then I wonder if that didn't have to be consciousness, if it could just be an executive function residing in the brain, then couldn't human beings just be like robots, responding to their environment, even building all these things that we built and being philosophers even? Do we need consciousness in order to be human?
Yeah, this is, I think you might be sort of intrigued by something that a lot of philosophers of mind, I am totally an amateur philosopher of mind. I should warn you.
Maybe that lets us have fun with it. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's this talk of, so it's called a philosophical zombie. So they're not the cool zombies that you get movies about. people who, well, the thought experiment is, could there be somebody who looks just like a human being, and you can even have conversations with them, but so to speak, is blank on the inside, lacks all conscious experience, and I would say lacks, if you like, that first person stance. And then there's a great deal of arguing about, what would that be? What would, is this even a possible kind of a thought experiment? And would it be any fun?
Yeah.
The thought is it wouldn't be much fun. I think that might be a point everybody agrees on. It's although, of course, pain is one thing you can also be conscious of, as well as various pleasures. And I don't know quite what to think. In some ways, it looks to me as if posing the thought experiment is what we sometimes call, begging the question. I don't mean raising the question. I mean actually already answering the question you're supposedly. You've assumed various kinds of things. For instance, I think this is one of the things that seems so strange about that example, is the idea that you could have a real conversation, the way we're having right now, with somebody, and there's, so to speak, no light on the inside.
Right. Well, to be solipsistic, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's no proof that I am not blank on the inside to you, right?
Well, except that the way we're engaging, I mean, it's not rock solid proof. I can sort of sort of speculate without actually believing. Oh, maybe he's, blank on the inside. It doesn't seem plausible.
It doesn't seem plausible, but let's think of this though. What if we know, with the advances of artificial intelligence moving so quickly, that one day there will be such thing as a robot who can have the conversation we're having now and will be indistinguishable from a human being?
Yeah. It's a lot harder though than that. I mean, that particular barrier has been a lot harder to crack,
right,
than people used to think it was.
Do you think it's uncrackable?
I would not. I am not a futurist. I would not want to speculate about that.
Okay.
We do, by the way, know that we create new, minds, consciousnesses, awarenesses all the time. I mean, people are born.
Sure.
And if people are, if a computer could be made that would actually have that first person's perspective, maybe people can be made in a lab.
Right.
But is it hard to see how a certain kind of configuration, perhaps of circuits running various programs, could constitute what we tend to think people have.
Right, and build an illusion that is so convincing. That we is indistinguishable from a real, quote unquote, real human being.
Yeah. And the reason I keep on going back to having conversation is, I can ask you things about, so what's going on inside that head of yours right now? The fact that, you're sort of looking in my direction, I think, I'm in some ways aware of myself as something that can appear to you in a certain kind of a way.
Right.
Probably women are always more aware of that than most guys, to be honest. But
probably.
we all are, right?
We're all capable of that, for sure. It seems that we are.
Yeah. Once you grew past the point of thinking that if you closed your eyes, the world would disappear.
Right, and I've read somewhere that that's what happens at a certain period of childhood. That's part of childhood development, is realizing that the world does not disappear when you close your eyes. But there's also something that I've always kind of thought about, which is that you said that consciousnesses are created every time someone is born or conceived or...
Yeah. I shouldn't say creed like that.
No, I know that. Yeah, but there seems to be a point at which there is a consciousness and there wasn't one before. And we don't, just like the speciation, there is no singular
or at least
point.
The possibility of developing consciousness is when somebody's born.
And what I've always thought about is, well, doesn't that also happen when I wake up in the morning, right? When if I wasn't dreaming or I don't remember dreaming and I'm just all of a sudden conscious again, well, that's indistinguishable to me from, say, being born. And that's what always frightened me about the show Star Trek.
Do you remember when you were born?
No. Well, no, but I assume that I was in some way sentient at that time. Maybe I wasn't. Yeah. Maybe it took me longer than others. But the show Star Trek, where you can teleport essentially from one place to another using the transporter. Well, if you're disassembling all of the particles in my body and reassembling them somewhere else, well, I've died in between. It doesn't matter that it just takes a millisecond.
Yeah.
I've died. And I've ended my consciousness and started again. And that's always kind of scared me. And the idea of going to bed at night is like, I don't want to die just to wake up tomorrow. I know it feels like I'm continuing, but that also feels like an illusion. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, philosophers always love Star Trek examples, although many of us also loathe them at the same time. Because, the example of the transporter is like, there's just no problem is ever raised about personal identity. And it does seem, is it the same? Is it the same person?
Right. Is it the same person? Yeah.
I think there was, in the New Generation version of it, there's one point where they split. Somebody, one character is reassembled in two different places, and they become they split two different people. They start off as indistinguishable from one another, but then they live sort of two different tracks.
Interesting.
And there's a question about who is who. Actually, the things like identical twins have sort of an interesting, because they're genetically indiscernible, right? But yeah, it's the everyday kind of everyday in the television show, the everyday use of the transporter, it seems to go on without anybody ever worrying about these kinds of questions, and it's very frustrating.
It is, yeah. But also just goes to show how easily we might accept a new reality.
Yeah.
I so want to keep going with this, but I have to ask you my 10 things now so we can wrap this up. So I've got 10 that looks like they're all words or couple words. You can react to emotionally, viscerally, but try to get your first reaction to each one. But brevity is a gift. So try to be short if you can. First one is the mind.
Weren't we just talking a bit about that?
We were.
I'm for it.
Leave it there. That's perfect. I'm for it. Well, the second one is consciousness.
I'm also for it. Wouldn't say that it's the same thing as the mind. And consciousness is both, as I said before, very close and also quite mysterious in some ways. I think I will leave it at there because either I shut up now or I'll go on for another couple of days.
I would like that. Third one, feminism.
Also for it. Feminism can mean, it has many different branches and can mean many different things. The basic thought is the terribly controversial idea that, yes, women are people too. And that there has been a problem of sexism.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's pretty hard I can't imagine I can't imagine meeting someone who's not a feminist.
I think if you muck around on the web enough, you'll find lots of people who aren't of that opinion.
Sure.
It is getting back to. I feel like I'm kind of want to sell my 17th century and 18th century philosophy. I'm actually teaching a seminar right now. It's got the fairly uninformative title of Women and Early Modern Philosophy, because there's a lot of women philosophers, but there's also some feminist philosophers who, some of them are women, and one very important one is not. But it's quite interesting because the amount of effort, even when it's, a woman is really interested in basically doing physics, the kind of having to fight for space and fend off ridicule is so interesting. And you see some of the same techniques that trolls use on the web now in the 17th century. It seems to be a kind of permanent sticking point. So interestingly, trolls aren't all that original.
Right.
Not very creative a lot of times.
Well, as they say, don't feed the trolls. Because they can only go by what you feed them.
Yeah.
Is that male feminist you were referring to? Is that Poulain de la Barre?
Very good. You have done your research.
Well, because I know you've done a lot of recent work on him, and
Well, really, just one kind of main article, and he's just absolutely wonderful. Well, I should say there are three works that he wrote in a period of 3 years that are just stunning.
Yeah, and an interesting trajectory. He was a Catholic priest who converted to Calvinism and lived in Geneva because he was expelled from France as a result of his conversion. Yeah.
Yeah. Or I'm not sure if they're completely clear to what degree he left willingly and so forth. There is a biography of him, but the records on Poulain are a little bit shaky.
Yeah. Okay, we got to get through these. The next one is creativity.
Yes.
You for it?
I am for it too. Although, maybe not creativity. I was going to say, I'm actually citing a former professor of mine now. Originality. It's a greatly overrated virtue. Trying to be original tends to get people into a lot of trouble. I do some philosophy of art, and there is a kind of area of philosophy of creativity. I'm not that interested in it, to be honest. Creativity, it seems to me, is very domain specific. It's one thing to be wildly creative in mathematics. It's very different from what it is to
be a painter.
Yeah,
right? Or
exactly.
being a creative philosopher is not the same thing as being an actor or something.
Exactly. I mean, they're all hard.
Yeah.
Okay. Creativity is hard, and it usually takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And that's why the reasons why I think it, there isn't such a thing as kind of like a lump of creativity that you can kind of transport around.
Right. Okay. Conversation.
I am definitely for it. And getting back to the point about minds and consciousness, maybe this is my Humean upbringing coming out. David Humean, not human upbringing. I do think that actually a lot of mind unconsciousness exists in things like conversation. As I said, first person stance, but it can be a first person plural stance. I still think it's interesting that Descartes held up conversation as a way you can really tell that there is a genuine mind there. And say somebody like Hume thinks in conversation, more generally interaction, is absolutely central to the way we develop as persons and develop all sorts of literally senses that we have.
Yeah, I mean, then there is this question: what is the mind or consciousness or whatever without conversation, even if it's conversation unto oneself or conversation with the past or okay, learning.
I'm also for that one as well.
It's a big positive list here.
Who would be against it, right? Learning is great. It's also hard. We said at the beginning about philosophy being fun, which I do think it's fun, but it can also be hard because you want to learn things, and learning can sometimes be tiring.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is fun is to feel that you are learning.
Okay. The next one is social media.
I don't want to sound sort of doomsday. I kind of, I can find myself quite addicted in an unpleasant way to Facebook, which a lot of other social media I've just never done. And that does seem to be a kind of common problem. And I sort of wonder, do we really know what we're kind of getting ourselves into?
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously it's also useful in all sorts of ways too.
Sure.
So, all of these things are complicated. And
totally.
You ask me on a different day, I'd say something totally different.
Which is, and hopefully, because we have to have another conversation, and hopefully it's different. Okay, next one is privacy.
I think it's probably a very important thing. I assume you're thinking we might think of social privacy, that is to say, being able to get away from other people.
It's the reason I think I ask this almost every time I do these 10 things, and the reason is because we don't talk about it enough anymore. It seemed to be a value that was really important some time ago, and now it's something where I guess collectively we seem to be okay to lose.
Yeah, although things like the universities, at least this university, the University of Alberta, has some fairly strict privacy legislation. I'm not sure it's always directed in the right ways. But more generally, I just that the feeling of sometimes being alone I think is probably important for a lot of humans to have.
Yeah.
I not because you want it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but
I think there's a sovereignty there too that we might lack and give up if we're constantly being picked apart and our attention is being redirected.
Yeah, and it's philosophy on the one hand. As I said, it seems it's very dialogic, but it also has these moments of you just got to go into a corner and think things through for yourself. And I think privacy, a room of one's own, as somebody famous once said, is actually
Virginia
quite
Woolf?
important. Yes.
Yeah. Globalization.
I am for that, but of course it can be done in a lot of different ways. I'm not necessarily for globalization by corporations. I have a deep Marxian streak in me, and even though I find the development of concepts of the nation state, as we were mentioning before, quite interesting, I also think there's something very strange about it as well.
Yeah, and I wonder just how temporal or temporary this idea is.
It's a relatively new idea, and it hasn't, in the whole dirty history of human beings, it hasn't actually lasted all that long. So we'll see what,
And that might actually relate to the last one, which is democracy.
Definitely for it. Although it does seem to me that you want a lot of the things you mentioned before. You want, people who have learned things and have minds and perhaps have a little bit of privacy. Because it can obviously be distorted in all sorts of ways. And the idea of making people ready for self-governance, it's got a long kind of history in philosophy. Even for some people who are not particularly democratic thinkers. There is no way, no fair or just way we've ever had of, so to speak, testing people for this kind of thing. But the thought that what it is to be a full citizen participating in democracy, I think is actually quite hard. I, would not, as I said, want to propose that anybody be tested for it. But the idea that, it takes some work to do for that.
Yeah.
I actually am, as I said before, I have this sort of Marxian streak, but I'm also a big fan of civil society. That notion that we actually are kind of in this together. We have certain sorts of expectations. We're walking on the sidewalk. At the same time, you will actually get out of my way. That we interact in certain kinds of ways, and if we reduce the friction that can happen between sorts of individuals, that's a really important kind of precursor to democratic government.
And this idea that it's okay to work on it. Mm-hmm. That part of it, what it means to live in a democracy or a democratic society, is that it's okay to try and to make it a little bit better today. And maybe fail, but then try something new, and that's the state in which we're living, as opposed to maybe a sort of a medieval or feudal state of just like accepting that tomorrow will be like today.
Yeah. Well, the other thing also, somebody, I can't remember who said this, I think this was just right, the thing about feudal, and not just feudal, but other relations, is we had as a series of private relationships, right? It was, serf to lord or something like that. And the idea of like civil society is very different, that we all have a kind of public relationship to one another, and then so we are perhaps also have that room of our own for privacy, but that we also have a kind of public persona. And I think that's actually, now I'm sounding like Rousseau, I find slightly disturbing because I'm not sure I want to go down that road. But that does seem to me quite important.
There seems to, I can't remember who wrote this recently, but that the new paradigm, like you were saying, that the paradigm in the Middle Ages or the feudal society was, I relate to you as your function, as a lord or as a warrior or as a priest or whatever. Today I relate to you in the way that you relate to me at the center of my universe. Like I am the center, and everything relates to me in such a way. Even government relates to me as something that I am part of, that I own in a way, that I am allowing to exist by that social contract.
Right. And I mean, one way to understand some of the particularly appalling features of a certain recent president of the United States, who shall remain unnamed, is that he does think of everything as like private relations. And, himself is also just out for what he can get. And, just doesn't seem to understand the kind of public dimension in which I'd say things like government exists. It's not solely restricted to government.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that's kind of appalling and sort of scary is the sort of attacks on what I call rather vaguely civil society.
Civil society, yeah.
Because it's hard won. Civil society was a very hard won achievement, and an achievement in some ways by a bunch of the people that I'm interested in philosophically. I mean, not solely by them, but during this period of time. And it's also can be surprisingly fragile, at least if it gets battered enough.
Well, and furthermore, it's not only hard won, but it's being won every day.
Yeah, that's right.
It has to be enacted, like that old idea that
Yeah.
if you want to keep your democracy, you have to actually participate in it.
Yeah.
That participation itself is what allows it to be.
Right. Yeah. But you also have to, just think of yourself as a person in a world with other persons. Actually, going back to, it's if you like, a kind of political version of having a theory of mind of, there are other people with other perspectives on things. And, I, with my own perspective, takes that into account.
Well, then the fact of there being other people enhances my humanity and may even prove my humanity as opposed to reduces it.
Yeah. I mean, of course, interacting with other people can sometimes go awry, but,
Sure.
You wouldn't want to get rid of it completely.
Yeah.
That's the stuff of dystopian after the bomb fell.
Yeah, no kidding.
Kind of movies.
Amy, this has been a really great conversation. I get such a kick out of chatting with somebody who does this for a living. And I envy you, so thank you so much.
This has been great fun. Wildly all over the place, but as you said, that's fun.
That's the point.
So, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. It's really been a treat.
Cool, thank you.
To learn more about my guest, Amy Schmitter, please go to the website, whatonearthisgoingon.ca. There you can find all previous episodes and a way to get in touch with me to let me know what you think of this episode or any other, and to give me your suggestions for future episodes. Now, your quote of the week was a bit hard to dig up because there is such an abundance of choice when it comes to philosophy. A lot of people out there have tried to put into words and into a pithy statement, what on earth is going on? But I picked René Descartes, in part because of our guest's fascination with him. One cannot conceive anything so strange and so implausible that it has not already been said by one philosopher or another. Next week, I'm chatting with Professor David Chandros of the University of Toronto about games. I'll see you then.